Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over that same pattern which we were talking about yesterday, but there has been some new developments. It looks like there could be a bit of a colder switch at the end of that little warm-up, so it looks like there is going to be some sort of colder period around mid or late December, which we were not expecting from yesterday. Most of the models have shifted around a little bit, so we will be discussing that. We'll be going over what has changed, and now that we're one day closer to that occurring, we do have a little bit more clarity on some things. It looks like this next couple of weeks is going to actually be fairly active in the northern part of the country, especially when it comes to light snow events. So I don't think we're going to see anything huge or major, at least until we hit about the 5th through 10th. But before then, we could definitely see a few more of these smaller clipper storms, like what we saw yesterday in Michigan and Ohio. Even into parts of Pennsylvania and New York, we could see a couple more of those type of systems occur within the next week or two, and then after that we're going to really get into the winter months, where we're going to get those really wound up storms. We could see some more major systems, which we haven't seen yet in November. So before we get into it, let's start off with the weather photo of the day. We actually had 4 submissions that were sent in yesterday and this morning. So I'm going to be spacing them out. I'm going to feature one today, one tomorrow, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday. This is probably the most, I think, definitely the most weather photos that we've had sent in on one day. Most of them were in from Michigan, and this one, of course, is from Vermont. So we had most of those submissions coming in from the Northeast and the Great Lakes from that storm that occurred yesterday, as well as that storm that happened on Friday and Saturday. So here's the photo in from Hayden. This one's from central Vermont, and it was taken on Saturday. Most of this snow fell overnight, but of course this photo was taken in the morning or the early afternoon on Saturday. Around 5 inches fell in central Vermont, and if you actually look at some of these reported snowfall numbers, we had some, especially higher up in elevation, a little bit more, some amounts of closer to 8 to 12 inches in that region. Some parts of the Adirondacks even got up near 15 inches or more of snowfall. So it was really a decent, hefty amount of snow. And that was just from that first wave, which happened on Friday and Saturday morning. Saturday evening, and especially for today, we're seeing a little bit more snowfall, especially into Pennsylvania, New York, and maybe even extending into some parts of northern New England, mostly from lake effect, but also in the form of some light snowfall. So it's definitely turning quite quickly, where we didn't have a lot of snow in much of October or early to mid-November, but now that we're getting into later November, it is definitely starting to feel a little bit more like winter. If you guys want to send in any of your snowfall photos, if you had any snow pictures that you want to send in, send them over to my email address, which is at elitheweatherguyyt@gmail.com, and then just write a general location from where you took this from, wherever you took your picture from. So, for example, like Hayden did, you could just write Central Vermont. It does not have to be a town name, does not have to be anything specific, but just a general area from where you took your photo from. Here's a look at what the current National Weather Service page looks like, and it's actually quite quiet today. We don't have many watches or warnings up today. We have some flood watches up in western Washington. We have some high wind warnings into northern Montana. We have winter weather advisories in parts of Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and parts of New York. And then we have some lake effect snow warnings right up near Erie and into southwesternmost New York. So we could be dealing with a little bit of lake effect there, and that could even add up closer to 6 or more inches once it's all said and done with. Yesterday we had a high temperature of 86 degrees in San Bernardino, California. The low temperature was at Mount Washington, New Hampshire, where they got down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. The highest rainfall report was in Crystal Point, Montana, where they got 1.2 inches of rain. And the highest snowfall report was 25 inches in Saranac, New York. But that was really an outlier snowfall report. I'm pretty sure that was probably taken at a higher elevation, because many of the surrounding areas were closer to 8 to 15 inches of snowfall within that range. So, well, again, that area of the Northeast did get quite a bit of snowfall, especially over the past 3 days. When you count in that storm from Friday and you add in whatever snow you got from the Saturday night and Sunday storm, and you add all that up, you did get some amounts that were actually fairly decent into those spots. So again, snowfall definitely starting to get back up to where they would typically be as of this time of year, and it looks like there isn't going to be much signs of slowing down over the next few weeks. Here's a look at the GFS model and the Arctic oscillation. So we were talking about this yesterday and showing you what was expected on the most recent run of some of these models. And yesterday we were speculating on whether or not we were actually going to see most of these oscillations like the Arctic oscillation and the NAO go from being in a positive state over the next week to 2 weeks, and eventually by about the 12th or 13th maybe dip down negative. And the reason that we have to speculate was because the GFS model only went out until about this time period right here. So while the GFS was showing this on a downward trend, it was still speculative on whether it was going to stay that way or maybe just bounce back. Now, the big update is that we have seen the GFS and other models like this, like the European and other sort of ensemble models that track the teleconnections. They have also been showing this a little bit more steady on the downward trend. So now instead of, keeping right around that zero line, maybe pushing down a little bit, it is showing more of a decent slope down into that negative direction. Now, this is really going to be sparked by a few different storms. The Arctic oscillation covers that Arctic circle, so covers northern Canada, northern Greenland, parts of Siberia, northernmost Europe. Areas like that is where it would track. And when you have this in the positive phase, usually that is not so good for cold and snow in the United States or even southern Canada, because normally that means that all that cold air is trapped up into the polar vortex region and it's not really coming down into the United States or Canada. But when you have more of a negative AO and you have a Arctic circle that's a little bit more in flux, that's kind of all over the place, that would mean that you could see more storms coming down, more snow and more cold air coming down from those Arctic regions and dipping into southern Canada and the United States. It is a little bit counterintuitive because actually when you have a really strong polar vortex, it's usually worse if you like cold and snow, because having a stronger polar vortex means that it's not going to come down as easily. So you're going to actually need to have more stronger storms to bring down some cold air, whereas if you had a weaker polar vortex that's kind of all over the place, even though the cold air might not be as potent, it will come down in a larger quantity over time. So you can see a couple storms being depicted here. You can see this little shift right here that's caused by one storm. We have another one right here, one more over this curve right here, and then another one where it starts to shift down a little bit more like this. So between about the 28th, which would be today, and around the, I would say 7th, or actually no, closer to the 8th or 9th, we see about 4 different storms being depicted on the Arctic oscillation, which causes it to briefly go down and then eventually spike back up, then go down, spike back up, and then we see eventually a gradual turn down into a less active pattern, but maybe a little bit colder and a little bit more favorable for snowfall. Now, the blue line is the one, or actually I believe the light green line, so this one right here is the model that we were seeing yesterday. So this is the line of what we were looking at yesterday, and what we saw was that we had this kind of spiking towards the end, which was a little bit of a negative sign if you want cold and snow. Right now, the newest change is that we've seen this becoming a little bit more in the negative direction, where we don't see that huge spike towards the end. It's actually going down over time. So that's a big difference from what we were seeing yesterday, at least on the AO. Here's the North Atlantic oscillation, and this is also quite different because now it's just kind of hovering around this line right here. The NAO, or the North Atlantic oscillation, really just covers parts of southern Greenland and that area south of there in the Atlantic. So it does cover a fairly important geographical area when we're talking about the weather, because that area can cause blocking if we have more blocking into that area, as well as for eastern Canada. If we have blocking up there, then we could definitely see more cold air, more storms, more of that translating into the United States. when you have that blocking pattern in place, it does allow for cold air to fill into the United States and flow into there a little bit better, because you have a more direct stream from the Arctic Circle right down to the United States. So having a negative NAO is fairly good if you like cold and snow and you live in the east. It is going to go positive most likely within the next day or two, and then you can see a couple fluctuations. The NAO, when it's picking up storms, is usually going to be about a day late, because when you think about it, realistically, the NAO covers the area that's east of Canada and east of the United States, all the way near Greenland. So by the time that storms get there, it's already about a day and a half, maybe 2 days removed or ahead, or actually behind what happened in the United States. So you can see those same storms being depicted. You can see this storm, which is right now over the United States, over the Northeast, that little clipper system, that's being depicted around the 1st of December, even though it's happening right now into the United States. You can also see a few storms that are a little bit behind of what the Arctic oscillation was showing. So that is a little bit interesting to look at. You're going to also see this on the Pacific North America index. When we look at that one is a little bit ahead of it. It's usually about 3 or 4 days ahead. So these are interesting little signs that some of these models are picking up on bigger storms in the long range. It doesn't really tell us any specifics. Now, these little dips right here does not really indicate whether it's going to be a snow event or a rain event or what type of storm it's going to be, but it does just indicate that these are days that you want to watch for. So you would want to be aware over these few couple day stretches where you have the threat of some sort of storm occurring. Here's the PNA, the Pacific North America Index, and this one is going to be going negative, but it doesn't really show any signs of stopping. Now, there is some circumstances where this is not horrible for the eastern United States, and where it could still provide some amount of cold air into the eastern United States. And the way that would happen is if you had the negative PNA, but it was more of a flatter type of pattern. So we didn't have anything that was really going from north to south, and we really just had an east to west type of flow. So you could have maybe colder air in the Pacific, but it was fairly similar to what's happening closer to the Atlantic, so it wouldn't really have too big of an impact on the pattern. Usually the PNA, though, does have a fairly decent indicator on how our weather patterns are going. So when the PNA is positive, typically that indicates ridging out over the west, and if it's warmer in the west, typically you're going to see the opposite happen in the east, but that's again not all the time. It is actually chillier in the northwest right now. That's usually the one outlier region. So when I say warmer in the west, really that means warmer for the southwest and the Rockies when you have a positive PNA. When it goes negative, like it's expected to do right around the 1st, that's where it starts to get a little bit on the milder side in the east and a little bit colder out in the west. And then you can see a couple big spikes here and there, and these are indications of some storms, or at least big pattern switches. So we do want to pay attention to right around the 6th, because we see this steady downturn from basically I would say right around the 28th, so right around today, all the way until about the 5th, where it's continuously going down over that 1 week time frame. But something happens around the 6th that causes it to spike further up. So this could indicate that around the 6th or around the 5th, we could have some sort of storm or some sort of colder air mass that plunges into the east for at least a day or two. And you can see it kind of plateaus around -1 or -1/2 in these areas, and then it goes back down and we see a general spiral downwards. But it is interesting when you see the PNA, because it is a big indicator of what's happening in the pattern. It's a very important oscillation that you need to have in the correct position, but it can also be really one of those oscillations that can indicate when you have a big pattern flip. So it's not really going to indicate like the NAO. The NAO will pick up on these smaller storms, but the PNA really only picks up on the bigger storms, the bigger pattern switches. So that's why it kind of is all over the place sometimes, and that's why you can see those big spikes or changes very suddenly. And something that you want to pay attention to. There are a lot of indications that we could see some sort of storm around the 5th or the 6th, even on some of the regular models when you look at the surface maps. So all of this is kind of adding up when you look at not only the oscillations but also some of these surface models. Now let's take a look at some of these surface models like the European, and we're just going to play this through over the next 10 days and give you an idea of what this is actually going to look like in your day-to-day life when you look at the weather outside and you figure out whether it's cold or it's warm. It is going to be chilly over the next couple of days. So for Monday, again, it is still going to be cold if you live in the northeast or into the Great Lakes. Still cold in the northeast for Tuesday, but the rest of the country is fairly mild, especially if you live out west. Still cold into the northeast by Wednesday. Here's Thursday. Here's Friday. So you can see not a lot changing. We see a few different storms into the east, and especially up in Canada. You can see one bigger storm over here. We have another one right there. We have one over British Columbia by this point. So we have three different storms right here, and then we have one elongated high pressure center, which is over the west and the central plains. So this is our general pattern. You do have some troughing into the east, so we do have a flow of cold air at least into the northeast and the Great Lakes. If you don't live in that area, it is going to be fairly mild, however. So really, the cold air is only going to be for areas that are into that northeastern quarter of the country. Here would be for Saturday, and you can see that it's still staying cold into the northeast, maybe also for parts of the Midwest as well. And then here would be by Sunday. Here's where the pattern starts to shift. So again, this is December 5th into December 6th. That's the same time that the PNA was indicating a big pattern switch where it started to go up near and close to that zero line once again. And what you see is that for the first time so far, the eastern United States is under some sort of high pressure system, and then we have some troughing into parts of the Northwest and the Midwest. Now, if we move this on one more, here's Monday, and you can see a fairly well-defined trough into the east, and it is colder over the west. And then you can see by Tuesday we have much warmer in the east, colder in the central plains. But I don't think this is going to be permanent, because if we look at this again, for Monday of the following week, so December 6th, we had that trough somewhat like this. By December 7th, we have the trough shape more like this. And so you could assume that this is a progressively moving system, meaning that it's going to be moving east to west or west to east fairly quickly. So we're going to see this moving through. We're not going to see this really stalling out. And I think that's going to be a big trend this winter, where we're not going to see too many patterns that just kind of sit there and don't move. I think we're going to see maybe 1 to 3 week stretches of cold or warm air, followed by the opposite happening for about a week or two after that. So, for example, if you have a colder 2 weeks in late December, maybe that gets followed by some warmer air into early January, which is then followed by more cold air. So I don't think anything is really going to stick for more than 2 or 3 weeks at a time. This is a very fast moving weather pattern that we're in. And there's really nothing that's going to break us out of it, at least until we hit March or April. So it looks like this is going to be an interesting winter to track. There will be some warm stretches here and there, but I don't think anything is really going to be that sustained. And even this trough right here, this is going to hit the East Coast by at least the 10th or the 11th. So really, you have a couple days of warm air, and then you follow that by a few more days of colder air and maybe even some rain or snow. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. I hope you guys did enjoy, and if you did, please consider leaving a like and turning on notifications. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.